Welcome to Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com, as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. Multiple ways to interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. Clearly, we're going to hear the ringing of the phone calls today. And you could also hit us up on Twitter.
Good start.
Hashtag Giants Chat. There we go. Phone's off the hook right off the top of the show. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast.
Wait. Yeah. Knicks trade. That's what it is. They're only going to give up a couple of draft picks, and they're going to get all the superstars in the league.
Wonderful. Tremendous breaking news. You must know somebody that the rest of us don't know. I'm glad we interrupted the flow of Big Blue Kickoff Live to squeeze that in.
Oh, little NBA draft humor. What the hell?
Yes, the NBA draft was yesterday. Well, you did some NBA comparisons and
we had some fun with that the other day. Yes, we did.
So apparently,
yes, we did.
That it did.
What
your
a
need.
boring draft it was, especially if you're the Knicks and don't have any picks.
How about burying the lead? That's where I thought you were going to lead off. Yeah. Well, it was also, I think, a bit of an unusual draft with respect to it was very top-heavy with European players, too. You didn't have most of the prolific United States college players go until pick 7, and then all of a sudden we started to see a flow.
No matter how many times the NBA tries to make it a big deal, it will never match the NFL draft. I'm sorry. It will never get to that level.
I think part of it is, think about how many months we spend going over prospects. That's not really done when you think about it in college basketball. I'm not to say the people who are invested in it are going to do their homework and research, but I don't think the basketball fan base overall is as passionate in studying up on the prospects as we go through the NFL.
How many NBA draft guides do you see on your
that's what I'm saying.
local
that's the
supermarket shelf or you know, how many shows are devoted to it? No, it's a fraction of what the NFL draft is.
And you would think it's much easier to digest all the basketball prospects.
Should be.
There's not nearly as many.
Should be.
Only goes 2 rounds.
Should be
about
easy.
60 players. Yeah. I mean, that's a fraction of how many guys
How
are
many
drafted.
GMs lost jobs because they butchered first-round picks, though? So maybe it's not so easy.
Well, because once again, there's less roster spots in the NBA, to your point, so you could argue the picks are more magnified.
No doubt.
There's not as much room for error. But yes, the NBA draft was last night in Brooklyn, so all of those players are filing in on their respective rosters. We already digested the NFL draft for the last few weeks.
Yes, we have.
So we don't necessarily need to revisit that. But today we thought that we'd do an interesting exercise. If you recall, earlier in the year, we broke down the NFC East by position, and one of the positions, obviously, that we focused on was tight end. Tight End University just wrapped up. That is an annual summit that all the tight ends across the NFL can take part in. It's the 3rd time. And Travis Kelce, Greg Olsen,
Kittle,
and George Kittle do a really good job coordinating that, and Giants tight ends have taken part. So considering that wrapped up, I think it'd be interesting to branch out a little bit. Where do the Giants tight ends stack up against the rest of the NFC? We could clearly do this exercise for the entire NFL landscape, but let's just focus on the actual conference that the Giants exist. Now, I went back and I looked at the tally that Pearson took studious notes on, and all of us had the Giants number 1. Based on the rest of the division. All of us had the Eagles number 2. It fluctuated a little with respect to Washington and Dallas. So we don't need to revisit the NFC East, but you've got a lot of depth in some of these other divisions. I think it would be interesting to see where Darren Waller and Daniel Bellinger specifically, and some teams you could argue go 3-4 deep, and we know Lawrence Cager and Tommy Sweeney are probably going to be part of the conversation, where they stack up against the rest of the NFC. So let's start, and we'll go division by division, Paul. We'll start with the NFC North. And when you look at the NFC North right now, you have really a mix of some teams that are relying on youth. There are a few guys that were drafted that are probably going to be the starting tight ends. Specifically, Green Bay comes to mind, as well as Detroit, because Detroit drafted Sam Laporta, and then you have Musgrave with Green Bay. So that right away goes to show you there's not a lot of proven talent to compare to what the Giants have. I think if you're going to go within the conversation of the NFC North, it probably starts with the Minnesota Vikings. You got T.J. Hawkinson, who they traded for from the Detroit Lions. He is by far the most polished option within that division.
Yeah, you know, the Lions didn't have to go too far to find a replacement for him, though, did they?
Not at all.
Getting Laporta as quickly as they did this past April. So good for them. And look, he was a second rounder, But there were a lot of people who thought, at least at the Combine, and I don't know if that changed very much over the next couple of months, but it didn't seem like it. There were still a lot of people who thought he might wind up being the best tight end in this draft over the long term. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
But there's little doubt about his skill set. He has a lot of talent. Now it just has to be developed and cultivated. You look at the rest of the division. I mean, you mentioned Musgrave going to Green Bay, also in the second. I never heard anybody say they thought he would be the best in the class. People liked him, but I don't think I ever heard him as the number one target by anybody who had gone through the draft predictions. Cole Kmet from the Bears.
Yep, and they have Robert Tonyan, who they added from the Packers.
You know, they're okay. But I don't know.
Options.
I don't know that their upside is as high as the two rookies that we just talked about.
That's fair.
And
well,
obviously
you could say
Hawkinson's
a better player than the both.
And obviously Hawkinson right now is the All-Pro level guy.
Yep.
So that's the way I see it.
Well, so that's why I would put Vikings 1. I mean, not Vikings, excuse me. Yeah, Vikings 1 with T.J. Hawkinson.
Have to be.
I'm confusing him with the Lions. Then I would go probably Bears after that because I do think they have two proven veteran players with experience. Even though Tunyan's been hurt in his latter years with the Packers, this is a rival now with Chicago. Then after that, I'd lean towards Detroit, followed by Green Bay, because the Lions also have Brock Wright, who's been in the league for a few years with Sam Laporta. So, once again, I'd go Minnesota, Chicago, Detroit, Green Bay. That's how I would stack up the NFC North.
Now, Josh Oliver is the second-string tight end for the Vikings. And
from Baltimore.
Yes. But he's basically been a journeyman in a handful of NFL seasons. So the one thing the Vikings do lack is a true depth chart tight end. I don't know that you could say he's necessarily, one of the better twos in the league. I'd be very surprised if you graded him that highly.
Well, Baltimore, he comes from a team, here's the positive spin, he comes from a team where they focus on the tight end, right? Even behind Mark Anderson. So you look at all of these guys that were in the mix last year for the Ravens, I would say that's not bad depth, considering he's coming from an offense where they did showcase that position.
Well, the Ravens have done well there, there's no doubt. But, I'm looking at a guy here who was with Jacksonville for a few years, then went to Baltimore for a few years, and now he's been in the league for a handful of seasons, and to my mind has never really busted.
And I meant Mark Andrews, by the way. I said Anderson.
Oh, did you say that?
Yeah,
I didn't catch it.
Realized. I don't know why I said it, but Andrews.
And so for Oliver, I don't see any reason to believe that after being in the league for X number of years now, I think it's 5 or 6 years, I don't see any reason to think that, he is a top-level second-string tight end. I just don't see it. But who knows?
Well, I mean, once again, I guess the question is, how much significance do you give a rookie tight end based on what he did in college versus how much do you give a top-heavy veteran who may outweigh the production of two other guys on another team?
No doubt.
Right? Everybody's going to look at that differently.
No doubt.
So I think the way that I'm looking at it is Hawkinson, I'd rather have him than the combination of Kmet and...
I'm not disputing that
there are other options.
I'm with you. Minnesota has to be number one in the division. I'm simply saying that it's a very tenuous title for them because if Hawkinson gets hurt, suddenly the balance of power at that position changes dramatically.
Sure, a lot of question marks. I mean, they have Justin Jefferson, but once again, the tight end is a big piece of what they do.
It's a very big piece.
Within that Minnesota offense.
We saw that as the Giants firsthand.
Sure. Now, with respect to the Giants in comparison to all these teams in the NFC North.
I'll take the Giants.
Yeah, I'll probably put the Giants number one ahead of all of these teams.
Absolutely.
Because
no
of
doubt in
the
my mind.
combination and depth that they have. Yeah. So that's why I think this is interesting exercise. Now we go over to the NFC South. So the NFC South, start with Atlanta. Falcons have a nice combo here. I know Kyle Pitts has had a bit of a down year after a rookie year where there were some flashes, but you can't ignore the athleticism. And then they brought in Jonnu Smith, who's a veteran from Tennessee and New England. It's not a bad 1-2 punch compared to other teams.
It's good. One of the better ones in the conference, I believe. But I'm not real excited about the other tight ends in the division, to be honest. Really? I know Hayden Hurst has done some good things in his career, so it's not like, he's a stiff or anything. But when you look at starting tight ends in the league, right now I'm not so sure he's in that upper tier. I think he's a little bit below.
I think they're going to focus on him in Carolina because, once again, they brought in Adam Thielen and DJ Chark, but I think that Hurst will probably get his fair share of targets. He did, even in a Cincinnati offense, Paul, where, remember a few years back, I know he came over from Atlanta, but in Cincinnati, he was surrounded by all of those star wide receivers, and they found options for him. Plus, I wouldn't overlook Ian Thomas and Tommy Tremble are two guys on the back end of the depth chart.
I like
that
Tremble.
Give them
I
some
always
versatility.
did. Always did like Tremble. But I guess what I'm saying about Hurst, I'm not saying he's not a good tight end. He's a good tight end. I think he's a second-tier guy, though. He's not on the Hockenson, Waller, Kelsey. He's not on that level.
No, of course not. Yeah, sure.
Andrews, he's not up there with those guys. Those guys are top-level guys. He's not there.
Sure. I would argue, I think the best depth chart in the NFC South is the Saints because they have Juwan Johnson, who had a very productive season last year. He was a big red zone target. Foster Moreau comes over from the Raiders, who was actually Darren Waller's backup, and he played a lot because Waller was hurt over the last 2 years. And then Taysom Hill's a tight end, Paul. I'm putting him in that position group. He is.
Why not? He's anything.
I know he's a running back, he's a quarterback, but Hill counts.
Put him anywhere you like.
Position group. Well, but once again, those three guys, I'll take those three over any other combination in the division. So the Saints are number one in my book in the NFC South.
Again, this goes back to, I know Kyle Pitts hasn't necessarily been all universe. He should have been when he came out in the draft, one of those top echelon guys that we just talked about a minute ago.
Yep.
Top tier guys. He's not in the penthouse. He hasn't proven to be in the penthouse.
It's been up and down in the first 2 years.
But talent-wise, he should be there. So if you want to be speculative about the 2023 season, it would be much like Hockenson with the Vikings, who is very top-heavy against the rest of the division. Pitts would be top-heavy against the rest of the division.
If he had the production of Hockenson, I would argue.
Big if, again, are you projecting in 23 that Pitts will be the guy he was supposed to be when he was drafted? If you still think that's possible, then you could lean to him as the top-heavy guy to lead the division. If you don't think that's possible and think that the somewhat up and down that we've seen so far is what he is, well, then I could understand your pick.
Yeah, I have Atlanta close, but Atlanta would be number 2, right behind New Orleans. And then we didn't mention the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, mainly because I think they have limited depth.
Yeah.
Cade Otton, nice player, 4th-round pick in 2022. Made some noise as a red zone target. But this goes to show you, Tampa Bay actually went from having some of the best tight ends in the league, and then all of a sudden these guys retired little by little or left via free agency.
Gronk could come out of retirement today and be the starting tight end on that team.
He probably could, yes.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it.
Even without X number of months of training, he could still do it.
Sure. So this one, I think, has a little bit more substance, this division overall, than the NFC North. But it would come down to New Orleans, Atlanta, Carolina, Tampa Bay.
Okay.
That's how I would put those 4. I think you're leaning more towards Atlanta, number 1, because of Kyle Pitts' athleticism.
Again, we're projecting for the 23 season, and I'm not ready to downgrade Pitts yet.
No, and I'm not downgrading. I'm more of, I'm a show-me guy. I got to see it.
And that's fine.
I haven't seen it yet consistently, so that's why I'd put New Orleans ahead. Now, as far as the Giants stacking up, once again, I'm very high on the Saints. I'd put New Orleans ahead of the Giants. That'd be the only team that I'd put ahead of the Giants.
I would not. But again, folks, I'm a little bit biased because I happen to like Lawrence Cager a lot. And I think as third-string tight ends go, skill set-wise, it's hard for me to just overlook him. I don't know that there's another third-string tight end in the league that I'd rather have.
Well, he showed some flashes. Unfortunately, he didn't get as much playing time sometimes as the season went along, but we'll see. That's why it's going to be a great battle on the back end of this tight end depth chart.
I know.
How many they choose to keep. And
they're different.
Yeah, whether or not they prioritize receiving over blocking in that department.
Cager is more of a receiving weapon. Obviously, Sweeney is a pseudo-offensive lineman, much like Howard Cross was near the end of his career. Yep. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. So do you need a spoon or do you need a fork? See, I'm getting the food thing in there, kind of.
Yes, I see.
With the utensils. Okay.
All good. I follow.
Spoon or fork. I don't know which way the Giants are going to lean. And that's probably what makes that decision a little more difficult for me because I just don't know where they're going. But I would go Cager.
Well, there's a case to be made for 4 tight ends on the roster. I don't think that's a stretch.
You'd have to rob a position, though, to do it.
And if everybody stays healthy during the course of training camp, and maybe you say to yourself, Cager could be a pseudo receiver because he does have that background on the resume, maybe that's how the door opens for 4 tight ends.
The one hint that we may have, and I think it's fair to say this, you may disagree, and it's fine if you do. We've heard that versatility word used an awful lot by not only the defensive staff, but the offensive staff as well. There's a very big emphasis here on guys who can do multiple things, even more than some other staffs. Cager could potentially, because of his wide receiver background and his skill set, line up on the boundary. He could.
Yeah.
It's not something you'd want to do a lot of necessarily, but he could line up on the boundary in certain plays and certain schemes and mixes. Tommy Sweeney's not doing that. Tommy Sweeney is an inline tight end, period. I don't even think you'd want to put him in the slot. He is an inline guy. I think he's a stationary guy. Cager, you can put him in the slot. You can put him in the boundary. You can certainly put him in line. That's not his strength, but you could. Maybe that versatility gives Cager the leg up on Sweeney. I don't know.
It's a good problem to have with respect to you have various options, and the fullback probably also enters this conversation.
It might.
Right?
I don't think they're going to keep a fullback. So that goes back to Myrick is here. And he was, quote, H-back, fullback, tight end when he took some snaps with this team in the past. Does that put him in a leg up? I don't know.
Well, here to me is the most attractive aspect of the Giants' tight end situation right now. We know Darren Waller has some injury baggage. Not to say that we're hoping anybody gets hurt, but in the event that he can't get through a whole season, I think you got to feel fantastic that you have a guy in Daniel Bellinger who got the experience got last year, proved he can contribute, proved he can be that number 1 tight end, that in the event you need to move him up the depth chart and rely on him a little bit more as opposed to a balanced attack. I think without any hesitation, you feel great about that.
See, you know me well enough to predict what I'm about to say. I would not mind seeing more double tight end packages.
I'm expecting
because
that.
You put Waller and Bellinger on the field at the same time. Those guys have capabilities. They've got the tools that they can hurt you. It's not like, well, your second tight end is kind of just exclusively this and he's kind of limited what he can. No, absolutely not. Waller and Bellinger as a duo can do damage.
100%. Completely with you. I'm just looking at it as the bottom line is every player on your roster is not going to play all 17 games.
Right.
That's the reality of the league, right? You have to anticipate you're going to lose a guy, not for the season, but a game here or there. You have 2 tight ends that in a pinch, you line them up. I don't think you have to change your offensive scheme,
I
right?
agree.
If you're Brian Dable and Mike Kafka, I think you say things that Waller does, you could throw Bellinger in, vice versa. And that's important. Just like we talk about the quarterback. When you have a guy that can run, you put a statue in place of that mobile quarterback. You have to change, Paul, what you do from an offensive standpoint. I don't think you have to navigate that challenge at the tight end position.
I believe the Giants' offensive coaching staff feels comfortable enough with Bellinger to use him occasionally in the big slot if they had to. So in that regard, he could mirror the same usage as Waller if Waller went down. I don't, however, think Bellinger would ever be on the boundary.
Correct. You're not going to send him vertically down the field like we've seen Waller be utilized with the Raiders.
That's the one part of Waller's game that Bellinger I don't think would mimic.
But to me, that's a luxury with respect to Waller's game.
It is.
Because you have wide receivers that you brought in who are going to be those vertical threats. Something tells me the Giants are not going to run him down the field.
I concur.
6-7 times
If this
a game.
receiving core stays healthy and does what it's supposed to do, you won't be looking for that.
Sure. I mean, because even the Raiders didn't utilize him in that capacity consistently. They picked their spots, right? And more often than not, he was effective when they picked their spots. Derek Carr threw it up, and Waller was there.
His tape is fun to watch.
Without a doubt. They don't build them in the war room or the lab quite like they do Darren Waller.
Yeah,
he is cut from a very different cloth, and that's why there's a lot of excitement surrounding what he could bring to the Giants this season, rightfully so. I get excited over having security blankets at various positions so that in the event you're put in a precarious spot, you still feel good about how you can operate your offense and how the season can flow. I mean, Paul, we've talked about this with every position. At some point in the last few years where the Giants lose a player at a key position, and, we're talking about some question marks, right, behind that player and whether or not those players are going to hold up. It was very similar to, and I think Wink Martindale deserves a lot of credit, not to get off topic, but we had this conversation when Adoree Jackson went down. And you're saying to yourself, there's a lot of young guys at corner, but there's not a lot of proven talent. And to Wink's credit, he went through the magic potion and he pushed all the right buttons and they got through a stretch where they didn't have their top corner. Doesn't work like that with every NFL team.
Let's just throw Jerome Henderson's name out there,
Sure,
too.
no, absolutely.
We don't do that enough.
100%. Yes, the position coach deserves credit.
I'm going to take just a little quick time out.
Sure.
Jerome Henderson is one dynamite, absolutely dynamite defensive backs coach. And Wink Martindale has said many times he thinks he's the best corners coach in the league. I can't tell you about that because I haven't gone through practices with every coach in the NFL, but I will tell you this, Jerome Henderson is a very impressive dude in a lot of ways, and the results speak for themselves as to how he helped get these guys up to speed.
Sure. Well, that's why that's promising for a guy like Deonte Banks, who's going to come into the league day one and work with Jerome Henderson, who, by the way, and this also gets overlooked, it's not just that he's been a coach for quite some time. He played the position, too. And when it comes to relating to a coach, I think that helps when you're in the room with a guy that put on the NFL uniform.
I think so, too. Yep. Some guys will tell you it's not a big deal. I do think it helps some.
I just think the advice carries a little bit more weight. Not to say that you would doubt and wouldn't listen to a coach that didn't play the position, but if you're in the NFL for many years and then you become a coach, I think that catches the attention of a younger player.
I would concur.
Let's finish off the NFC West. So we'll start with the San Francisco 49ers, who love their tight ends. And George Kittle tops the list. He's the guy that orchestrates and helps put together Tight End University. Then Charlie Werner is right behind him, who has been a seasoned veteran. He's not a guy that gets a lot of targets, but he does some of the dirty work.
He's okay.
And then they have younger guys, actually two players that they drafted in the third round to the seventh round. As far as the Rams are concerned, now, L.A. has some sneaky depth here. Tyler Higbee, proven tight end. They acquired Hunter Long from the Dolphins. Bryson Hopkins, he came up big in that Super Bowl when they had injuries at that position. He was their fourth-round pick in 2020. I do work with his dad, Brad, on Sirius XM NFL Radio, so I'm a little bit biased. I'm pulling for him in terms of his development. But in all seriousness, he has taken advantage of his flashes. So the Rams, to me, have more depth than the Niners. The Niners are top-heavy, but L.A. has more options that they can turn to if you were just to compare those two teams.
Well, Ertz and McBride is the top two on the Cardinals.
I didn't get to the
That's not exactly shabby either.
Not at all. I was just looking at the first two. I wanted your
Okay.
response to the first two.
I concur, but
we're at the 50-yard line.
Don't leave Arizona out.
I'm not. I wanted to get you to react and digest the first half of the NFC West. Okay, so now we make our transition to what Paul was laying out there. All right, I'll leave the Cardinals to last because he already built them up as if they're the juggernaut of this group. Let's go to the Seahawks. Seahawks not too shabby either, okay? And you know they utilize a number of tight ends. Noah Fant, who came over in the Russell Wilson trade. Will Dissly, who has done a really nice job blocking and receiving. And I wouldn't sleep on also Colby Parkinson is another one of those tight ends. He was a fourth-round pick in 2020.
He's okay.
They're very similar to New Orleans, where they maximize all the tight ends on the roster, is how I would put it. But Seattle and the Rams are neck and neck with respect to the depth and the volume. And then you go to the Cardinals, as you mentioned, Zach Ertz, Trey McBride, who they drafted last year. That probably presents the best 1-2 punch in the division. I'm with you there.
I think they could, in theory, challenge the Giants as the best 1-2 punch in the conference.
That's fair. Yeah. But in terms of, let's just finish up NFC West. Arizona won. Is that how you have it? Now, who would you go to?
I would probably have to go with the 49ers. I just think they're top heavy with Kittle, and it's too top heavy for me. He's just, how preferential I am to him because I liked him coming out of school.
Now remember, Tyler Higbee's a very productive tight end.
I didn't say he wasn't.
No. I'm just saying when you talk about top heaviness, Higbee, he may not put the numbers up of Kittle.
Yeah, Kittle is special.
Kittle is special. And Werner is, I think, a solid backup and a guy that does, once again, some of the things that don't show up.
Enough.
So I'll go Arizona 1. I'll go San Francisco 2. I'm with you there. Then I think it becomes difficult because, once again, I think the Rams and the Seahawks present multiple options. How Seattle utilizes the tight ends, to me, I'll give them the edge slightly over the Rams. So I'll go Seattle 3 and the Rams 4.
I agree with you that the Seahawks have always found a way to maximize the tight end room. Whoever was in that room, even their third stringers usually gave them something. They found a way to make it happen. So for that reason, I'll go there. I don't necessarily know if the talent quotient says they should be, but I'll go with the schematics.
Now, as far as these teams stacking up against the Giants, I would go Arizona over the Giants. So that would be the second team I'd put ahead of the Giants. The Saints were my first team. Would you take Arizona or would you take another team over the Giants?
No, I'm saying Giants 1, Cardinals right behind them. Really close. Really close. By a Kleenex tissue. I mean, I think it's close. But I would go I think the Giants 1-2 punch of Waller and Bellinger is the best in the conference.
Well, they make a strong case, as we discussed. It's just, once again, I think Zach Ertz has been a little bit more durable than Darren Waller.
Can't disagree with that.
And McBride and Bellinger, they're both second-year players. So the differential's not immense. I would say McBride was clearly the more decorated tight end in college.
That's true.
Okay? So
that's true.
If you're looking at it through that lens plus the rookie year, I'd give McBride the slight edge. It's not to say that McBride's going to be a better tight end when it's all said and done. So that's why Arizona and the Saints are the two teams I'm taking over the Giants. But, I mean, it just goes to show you, the Giants, that's a top 5 tight end group in the NFC.
This Waller trade was huge. Not that anybody needs to read that headline because I think they figured it out the second the Giants made the deal. But Waller just changes so much for this club.
Absolutely, and that's why he stays healthy. It's no surprise if Waller is the leading receiver, even in comparison to all the other guys they have at the wideout position.
I don't think there's any doubt. He's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver this year. I'm absolutely sure of it.
Well, he has the capability. He plays 16, 17
Done it
games.
Twice.
Yeah, 16, 17 games. 1,000 is absolutely within striking distance. Less than that could become challenging and difficult.
I think you're looking at an offensive coordinator and a head coach who were not only thrilled and excited to get Waller in here, but immediately started cooking up ways to get him the ball. So he will not lack targets. The only way that he does not produce this year is because he's injured and can't get on the field. If he's on the field, they will find ways to make use of him. There is no question in my mind.
Well, that's why there's been a lot of comparisons to the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's not just because Kafka was there. It's the fact that they were built around Kelsey eats up all the targets, especially with Tyreek Hill gone, and everybody else is a complementary weapon. Could the Giants operate identical to that? 100%.
Well, and we know Dable was an assistant with the Patriots when they had Gronk and Hernandez.
Yep.
I mean, this should work out really well.
Few reminders before we open up the phone lines here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Giants Huddle Podcast. You can check it out on your favorite podcast platform, giants.com/podcast. And don't forget, the latest edition is up in case you have not seen it yet. We just had an interview with PJ Fleck, the University of Minnesota head coach. Good conversation on John Michael Schmidt. So that is the latest one that you could check out. As far as the upcoming season, the 2023 NFL campaign, it's officially out. Single game tickets are now on sale. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. Visit giants.com/tickets to secure your seat. And speaking of tickets, you can take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships, they're now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. Giants official connected TV streaming app. It's Giants TV. It brings you original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. So let's open up the lines at 201-939-4513. We check in with David in Michigan here on Friday's edition of BBKL. What's happening, David? What do you got for us?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Hey, I want to mention because I feel such a connection to you guys. Not only did I have the pleasure and privilege of graduating college with the great Paul Dottino, but I graduated high school with Dan Lynch.
Ah.
Wow.
That is some connection.
Dan Lynch, for you folks who may not understand, he was a very, very important marketing executive here with the Giants for almost 20 years, 2 tenures, by the way, and has since now retired from the Giants and gone on to...
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Just within the last 2 weeks, I believe, and is now chief of marketing with the World Cup Committee.
Yep.
Which will be playing their games here at MetLife Stadium in 2024.
So he's staying in the football world. He's just going to the other side of the world.
Yes.
With respect
and
to
still in the same property.
That's correct. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Hey, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned, during this lull in the off season, that I want us to organize a Stump P-Dot Day for Giants trivia.
Oh, boy.
And you guys, hang on, you guys blew me off, but the other day, I was listening to Paul and Casillas draft a basketball team from the Giants roster, and I thought,
so who's your five? Who's your five? Come on, spit it out. Who's your five?
Oh, no. Listen,
come on.
Hang on. Okay, here's one. There are 4 Giants first-round draft picks that went to 2.
No. I meant who's your 5 basketball players off this roster?
Oh, who's the 5 basketball players? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I was, if I had to do it, I was pretty much in line with you guys. But I thought,
okay,
before you blow off my Giant trivia day.
But before we go though, I will also tell you I did check with some of the players subsequently, and it seemed to me that there was more of a consensus among some of the players that Tyrod Taylor should be the starting point guard. Just a little bit of information there to throw out.
All right. So listen, I have one hardcore question for you guys
go ahead.
today about the defensive line. Now,
Right.
I just want to say, you guys, and I know you're going to. You guys are much bigger fans of Leonard Williams than I am. Like, I as a player, and I don't think the Giants are going to re-sign him after this coming season. Here's my question, and I know how you love hypotheticals, Paul. If Chase Young plays a full complement of season, he has a good year, would you look to replace Leonard Williams with Chase Young?
There are a lot of factors involved in that question. Now, I will say this, salary cap-wise going into next year, the Giants are going to have to mind their P's and Q's. They're not going to be in a position to open up the vaults for anybody, which is why your comment about Leonard Williams could be very true. If Leonard has a big bang-up kind of season like he did a couple of years ago and had 11.5 sacks, chances are the Giants may not be able to afford him, and he may have to go somewhere else. But that also means that they're not going to be able to afford an adequate replacement who is going to play at that level anyway. So both ends of your question kind of become very sticky.
I also don't think Chase Young and Leonard Williams are identical in terms of the type of players.
They're really not.
So I don't look at Chase Young as a replacement for Leonard Williams. I just look at him as an additional weapon.
He's talking about pass rusher. He's just,
but Leonard gives you more versatility at that
No
position.
doubt.
Whereas Chase doesn't.
No doubt.
It's a little bit different from that standpoint.
See, I thought the Giants' cap situation was going to be a lot better next year.
Yeah, but I mean that doesn't mean that you could give the type of deal that maybe Leonard Williams is seeking, though. Because remember, the conversation is going to come up about paying Andrew Thomas next year.
Correct. And Xavier McKinney.
Yeah, so you're going to have to start rewarding your own players.
I mean,
you have to make big
it's
decisions
not going to be easy.
That's true.
And you've got real low cap numbers this year on Daniel Jones on Dexter Lawrence,
And those start
and
to increase.
potentially a low cap number on Saquon Barkley if he signs his multi-year deal. But in each one of those cases, year 2 is going to start bumping up. So you're not going to have as much money as you think.
Yeah, remember, cap space is not just about going after talent outside the organization. It's about having the ability to re-sign your own.
No doubt.
So that's a big
And
part of it.
listen, a very, very quick, fast Giant trivia. Paul?
Go ahead.
The Giants first round once made their first round draft pick a player from Fordham. Who was it?
First rounder out of Fordham? My
Yep.
goodness. No, you know what? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, there you go.
Really?
Stumped the Dottino.
No, David, I'm sorry. I know I'm letting
There you
down
go.
my alums, but I'm sorry.
Steve Filipowicz, 1943.
Paul remembers those days, the leather helmets and all.
It's
Yeah.
a little
It
bit
was-
before my time, but that's okay. You got me, David.
All right, man. I'm gonna
See, I thought you were going to ask me who's the last Fordham player to play for the Giants, and that's Ken Parker, defensive back, who was here in the early 70s.
I thought the whole point of having a classmate on is to make you look good, not make you look bad. And David, appreciate the phone call. We'll let you go on that note. See, I was going to ask you, did you coordinate this phone call to, help prop you up? And this is what he does. He puts you on the spot like that.
It's okay.
To ask you a 1943 question.
Well,
Wow.
He started with a hard one.
Yeah.
I
Boy,
mean,
came right out of the
holy
gates.
smokes. Wow. Hey, whatever. Look, I wish I was around that long to watch things, but, well, then again, maybe I wouldn't be here today if I was around back in 43. I don't know.
Well, something tells me the laps around MetLife Stadium would help you survive in some capacity.
I'm trying.
Yeah, well.
I keep Father Time in the rearview mirror. I don't want him even coming close to my shadow.
I don't think Father Time wants to approach you, to be honest.
Probably
with you.
doesn't.
He's probably scared of you. He's
Good
got
point.
other people that he's.
I intimidate Father
There
Time.
you go. Congratulations. Continue to work your magic. So, is there a high school reunion that you take part?
No,
Has
I
that
do
happened
not.
at all? That has
No, I
never
do not.
happened.
No, I
Okay.
do not.
But do you know who that caller was? Has there been some
Oh,
interaction?
from
Yes.
Fordham? For
Well,
college?
I thought he said high school.
No, high school with Dan Lynch.
Oh, okay.
College
I
at
flipped it.
Fordham.
Gotcha.
with-
Okay, so it was
with
college.
David.
Oh, it was high school with Dan Lynch.
Yes.
Okay, I
yes.
was thinking the reverse.
I have
Okay.
not been to a college reunion either, but
Well, college
but yes,
reunion
I know,
is
I know,
big.
David.
I think a high
Sure.
school reunion is a little bit more digestible because I would think it's a little bit more intimate. Maybe you know those people. College, the classes. Think about your college alone. If you go to a university, think about all the colleges
I know.
from that year's class.
I know.
I mean, that would be very difficult. Talking straight. That's why. Okay, so I stand corrected. This was a college
Yes.
classmate of yours. Okay,
Yes.
so we'll excuse then the resume with respect to the reunion.
Okay.
Okay. I'll understand why you didn't have one. If it was high school, though, I would have demanded maybe that there be some get-togethers under the circumstances. All right, let's head back to the phone lines. Now we're listening to Paul's middle school classmate, Jason in New Haven here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Jason, welcome aboard. Maybe you could tell us some stories about what it was like sharing a middle school classroom with Paul. We're very excited. Yes.
I was born in '84, so I don't think I was around.
Okay.
But I appreciate you guys taking my call.
Thank you.
Just a few points. Paul, I will agree with you on 2 points you made earlier in the show. Or I don't know if you made it yesterday or today, so forgive me.
No problem.
Keith Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
To me, he was one of the better defensive linemen, I'll just say as a group, or defensive tackles in Giants history. How he never got a Pro Bowl nod, I don't know if he did or not, but if he
Never
did,
did.
I don't know how he never got one. I mean, at some points the man was pretty much dominant. He couldn't be blocked inside. So
Yeah. And also ferocious against the run. And if you ever got a chance to talk to guys like Jesse Armstead and Mike Barrow, who were part of the linebacking unit on that Super Bowl 35 team in 2000, they will tell you that Keith Hamilton was as valuable as any player on that roster. That's how good he was.
By the way,
Yeah,
he was, I didn't mean to interrupt, we'll let you continue, Jason, was second team All-Pro. So he
Yes,
may have not made
but
the
he-
Pro Bowl, but he was second team All-Pro
Once.
in 2000.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying most people don't bring that up. All-Pro actually is more meaningful
I
than the Pro Bowl.
understand, but
That's why.
but recognition. See, Pro Bowl is because a lot of that's popularity and that's
Yep.
recognition. He never got the recognition he deserved.
No, that's fair. Yeah. I just wanted
Go
to
ahead, caller.
make mention of the second team All-Pro.
Right. Yeah, I'd love to see him a prime Hamilton with Dexter and Leo. I think that'd have been quite the show to see.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure. I'm sure Madden will allow you to do that, Jason. If you have some time,
Exactly.
right?
Hey,
Yeah.
Keith started out as a defensive end when he came out of the University of Pittsburgh, and then they moved him inside.
Well, see, that's why in Madden you put Dex in the middle and you put Keith Hamilton on the outside. There you go. You're singing
great.
my music.
Oh,
here.
it's great.
Okay, there you go.
All right.
Yes.
So back to real football. A point I wanted to, or 2 points I wanted to make. The receiving core. I think potentially this receiving core, and I'm gonna include Waller, Cager, and Bellinger in that group as far as pass catchers.
So passing game. You're going to talk passing game.
Yeah, the passing game. Yes. I've been watching the Giants since I was a little kid, 4 years old, since I can remember. Outside of that Cruz, Nix, and Manningham trio, as far as the overall core, I think this is probably the most, I don't want to say deadly because we haven't seen them on the field, of course, but just from a standpoint of the different types of receivers we have, I'm very excited.
Mm-hmm.
I just say off potential because they haven't played. A lot of these players have been injured, so who knows what's going to happen. That's why I say potential, but that's just because there are so many things that can impact their past performance. Like, let's say a Campbell. Last year, he had a quarterback carousel the whole season, and he was finally healthy. So
yes,
I'm sure if he had a steady quarterback, maybe his stats would have been bigger. So who knows? And different offensive schemes, so on and so forth. I think the mixture of speed and size, if they remain healthy and they play up to their potentials, I think it's awesome. Like you guys said, Daboll was the coach with the Patriots when they had Gronk, and of course Kafka was there in Kansas City, of course, when they had
Kelsey.
Kelsey, excuse me. So I think those two pretty much can find a way to use Waller in various roles. So I'm very excited. Now, of course, if the O-line is even a few ticks better than last year, especially Neal, I'm not too concerned about, of course, Thomas is all-pro, so we're not too concerned about that. I think the guards will be decent, but if Neal can hold up just a split second more with some of those blocks, I really think we're gonna do really well on offense. So like I said, that's dependent on injuries and stuff like that. Last point, you guys brought up Lawrence Cager. I'm very high on Cager. Now Bellinger was the tight end one last year, deservedly so. I thought he played well, but I'm really interested to see what Cager brings to the table. He is kind of a Darren Waller light. Not saying he's as good as Darren Waller because he's not, but maybe he can learn a few tricks of the trade from Waller. He has that same physical build, ex-receiver, good size, can run. Even some catches he made last year. I remember he had one with Dallas he caught that they called back when we were in Dallas, which I thought was a bogus call to begin with. But be there as it may, he had another touchdown catch, I think, against Texans or the Colts or one of it. So he has some potential. So I'm definitely interested to see what he can do. And in the last point, Daniel Jones, I will continue to say it. I've been a big believer in him since we drafted him. Now, he had his ups and downs. Some things, he calls on himself, a lot of the turnovers, but all the other things, coaching changes, different schemes, different receivers in and out, not a steady offensive line. So I think this is the year, if everything breaks even, if everything goes the course. I mean, I think we're looking at a top 10, dare I say, and I may sound like a homer, but I don't care. I think we're looking at one of the top 5 young quarterbacks in the league. I don't care what nobody else tells me. He has the tools. He has the arm. I remember you guys did a podcast with his quarterback coach, I believe, in the offseason.
Yes.
I want to say last week. And I thought that was an awesome, awesome show, the way he kind of delved into what Daniel Jones has been working on. And I'm really looking forward to him. Even from the ball fakes last year, the way he was some of the ball fakes he had against Chicago, against Indianapolis. This dude really has some tools. And I know I sound like a homer, but I'm really hoping we stay healthy this year and we can really make some noise. So I want to thank you guys for taking my call. And,
all right, Jason.
I'll take the call.
Jason, before you go, realistically speaking, do you think it's too much to ask this offense to average 24 points a game?
No, that's why I mentioned the offensive line. Like we all know, you guys have been around the league, around football. I played college football. Everything starts with the line. That's just really the backbone of any offense. So if we could stay if we could stay even middle of the pack as far as a unit. I'm a big believer in Bredesen. I think he's a really good player that nobody talks about. I think he's going to take that left guard. I doubt they're going to unseat Glowinski, so I don't know what's going to happen in Zudo. Maybe he takes it over next year if everything breaks even. But to me, the key right now is Neal. And I'm a big believer in Neal. He was hurt last year, transitioned to the right tackle, had to deal with Parsons and Reddick. Just a horror of defensive linemen he had to play last year. So if Neal can even be average, he doesn't have to be Thomas, but as long as he's average, I don't see why we can't score 26 points, 25 points with the weapons we have.
Oh, that's
Daniel
even better.
Jones in the second. Daniel Jones in the
that's
second
some
year
jump
in the
from
offense.
last season.
Yeah, they were 20, just
So
about
I'll take it
21
off the
last
air
year.
so you
Thank you,
Take the phone call,
Jason.
Jason.
They were
Yeah.
about 21 last year. Now, to me, I think a field goal extra is realistic and not too much to ask. Maybe I'm a little conservative. Maybe the call is right. Maybe they can average 26 a game. I think that's quite a leap. I'd be happy. I think I'd be. I hate to use the word satisfied, but I think if the Giants can score 24 a game, that will bode well for their playoff chances.
Yeah, 24 is a nice number, but, once again, you just got to look at it through the lens of, in order to even increase your scoring by 3 to 4 points, just do the basic math, what that entails over the course of a season. It doesn't seem like a lot, right?
I know.
3 points. I mean, that's nothing. But
I know.
Over the course of a season, it does add
Well,
up.
they did that previous year to last year.
Sure, but
they brought it up by about a field goal.
The standard from where they were coming from was not.
It was like
much of
slogging through mud.
Now,
it was hard.
Now you don't have a standard that's skyrocketing, but you have at least some respectability that you're operating with. Okay?
Concur.
So it's a little bit different.
Helps to have a great field goal kicker.
It does. Well, especially when you play all those close games.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. I mean, I look at when the Raiders, and I think we brought this up on previous shows, the Raiders, when Waller had one of his career years, the Raiders only averaged about 19, 20 points a game.
Right.
And remember, they didn't have star-studded wide receivers, and the Giants have a nice group, but they don't necessarily have a star-studded wide receiver. So there's similarities from that standpoint, and even Waller alone wasn't going to, boost the offense 5-6 points per game.
I think one of the things that can help the Giants' offensive point total, and we probably don't think about this very often because we know that the Giants' success defensively is because what they do on third down and in the red zone. That's always going to be the emphasis in Wink Martindale's defense. But I think they're going to be better between the 20s on defense this year, which may, in fact, it should help their average yards per start, per drive. So if you're giving them a little bit better field position, maybe it's even only 8 or 9 yards. But if that's just one first down, well, maybe that's just another 8 or 9 yards or one first down or so where, you know what? Graham Gano can hit a 52-yarder as opposed to you're trying to punt the ball.
Sure. Well, and the new kickoff rule, we'll see what impact that has, too. I mean, getting the ball at the
Haven't even
25-yard
thought
line.
about that.
I mean,
Haven't even thought about the new kickoff rule. So we'll see. We just don't know. Even Thomas McGahee, the special teams coordinator, does not know how the new rule will take
that's going to be a wait-and-see approach.
take effect. So or how it will play out. So, I mean, I'm telling you, I think the defense is going to be better in between the 20s. I do believe that.
Well, if the defense improves, that's great. But we'll see whether or not that carries over to your
Again,
point.
field
to the
position
offensive
should,
side.
in theory, field position should help the offense score more points.
You would hope, correct. But you got to also make sure you don't put yourself in a position to go backwards as opposed to
no
forwards.
doubt.
Remember, that's the fine line.
No doubt.
You get a penalty, that takes away all the good
I don't
field
want to hear about
positioning.
those things.
Oh, but those things do come into play. And by the way, I just looked it up. 2019, which was Waller's first career breakout campaign.
Right.
The Raiders averaged 19.6 points per game. Just to give you an idea. I'm not saying it's equivalent to the Giants. Now, he had a fantastic year the following year, and they did make a jump. They actually made a noticeable jump. They went up to 27 points per game that season. And that's on the opposite end of the spectrum if you look at the norm in the NFL, and they were a top 10 scoring offense.
Was there another huge jump for any particular player offensively besides Waller from that second year?
That's a fair point. Well, I'll just take a glance. I mean, Derek Carr's the first guy I would go towards.
Well,
so
yeah.
Right? Because he's the guy throwing the ball. He played all 16 games, This is the 2020 season. He had 27 touchdowns against 9 interceptions. Now let me look at what he did in 2019. Numbers. Very strong numbers, because that could have made the ultimate difference. In 2019, Carr played all 16 games, 21 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. So the interceptions were identical pretty much. He just had 8 more passing touchdowns. But I don't pin it on 8 more passing touchdowns. Accounts for a difference of 8 points per game. That's way too much.
What was their yardage per game? Forget the points for a moment. What was their yardage per game in those 2 years?
Let's see. Yardage per game. Do they have? They have the points. Why don't they have the yardage? And this is Pro Football Reference. For some reason, that I'm going to have to look up.
Okay.
I'll look that up as we move along. No, that's fair. Why, you think it made a significant jump in terms of the total yardage per game?
There's certainly a chance. Again, I don't know how much field position had to do with that scoring prowess either, but I'm going to guess my first shot in the dark says the yardage was a bit different.
It's possible. Well, this will be a good exercise to determine whether or not, even yardage can help your cause. Okay, let's see. I got the 2019 regular season total yardage here. And the Raiders in 2019, as I continue to move through the list here, let's see.
It's funny because
364 yards in 2019. And that put them, what did that put
probably
them?
in
1, 2, 3, 4,
middle
5,
third of the
6,
pack,
7,
right?
8, 9, 10. Put them 11th. They were right outside the top 10.
Right outside
and
the top 10.
And that year, they only averaged 19.6 points per game.
Which is right at the edge of the first third, right? Because if you divide the NFL into threes, it's basically 11, 11, 11, kind of.
Now let's see 2020 in comparison. They were at 383 yards. So they jumped about 20 yards per game.
Well,
from 19 to 20.
Now think about that. 20 yards per game. That could easily get you at least a field goal a game.
Well, that's the field positioning that you're talking about.
Yes.
If you look at it
yes.
from that standpoint. Yeah. But this is a difference of 8 points a game, Paul, which is insane.
That's a lot.
We're not talking about field goal.
That's a lot.
They went from 19 to 27.
I'm going to ask them for 24 a game this year. I think
that's it's a reasonable ask.
Okay.
And I never shied away from your number. The 26, which is what the caller brought up, that may be pushing it. 24, I think, is reasonable.
He could be greedy if he wants to be.
He could be greedy. It's the
offseason.
He's been
rooting for the team
Everybody
since 84. He's absolutely entitled to be greedy if he wants to be.
Now, the other thing that I wanted to respond to was the point about Lawrence Cager. And if you remember, we had a question yesterday about Vernon Butler on the defensive line. And I think there's similarities between the two in terms of my response. In order for a guy like Cager, when you say you're excited to see what he could do, A, he's got to make the roster. That's number one, okay?
Right.
Number two, and this is just like the conversation we had about Vernon Butler, the second factor is, in order for realistically Cager to get the opportunities and the targets where you would notice him and he would make some splashes, somebody else ahead of him would have to get hurt.
Right. And
which I don't think anyone is banking on.
No.
Yeah,
nobody wants that. Forget about banking on it.
Yeah. So that's why you've got to be, when you say you're excited about a player, I always say, okay, well, what's the path for him to actually produce? It's not an easy path when you have Darren Waller and Daniel Bellinger ahead of you.
Not at all.
Taking reps, snaps, and targets.
The third tight end on the Giants, if everything goes according to game plan, he's going to play 12% of the snaps, maybe? Maybe?
Far and few. Remember, Cager didn't have Waller to worry about. He only had Bellinger last season. And is it possible that Thanksgiving game, did Bellinger miss that Thanksgiving game? You remember he was referencing the plays he made against Dallas? That was Thanksgiving.
He did.
Bellinger may have not even played that game.
I think he missed that game.
So that may have been a reason why.
But you also have to understand. You also have to
is
understand,
my point.
Cager got a late start coming in here last year.
That's fair. Sure.
Which put him behind the 8 ball, and it kind of prevented him from maybe even rising up a little quicker.
I'll give you that. But once again, now he's got even more players ahead of him.
Well, that's true.
That's my point.
No
he
doubt.
didn't have Waller to deal with.
No doubt.
Now
At least he's had an off season though to prepare.
No, you could argue he has more familiarity and comfort with the scheme. I'm with you.
I haven't checked, and this would be a very good exercise, and we should have done this before the program because we were talking tight ends. How many snaps does a third-string tight end play in the National Football League? What is the average number of snaps? Is it 12%? Is it 10%?
Well, I could look that up.
Is it 8%? What does the third-string tight end usually get?
Well,
I'm going to say it's probably no more than 15% of the offensive snaps during the season.
I would say in the 15 to 20%
You think
is
it's
a
up to 20?
reasonable expectation. Only because I'm accounting for some of the guys ahead of you may have missed a few games. So therefore, there's going to be a game where it boosts the potential of how much playing time you get.
Of course, you'd like to believe, and folks, who knows if this is going to happen, you'd like to believe there's also going to be games where you will get the game out of hand. And maybe if you
Which
have
also-
a really nice
correct.
lead, and then the fourth quarter, okay, it's your quarter. Get Waller off the field. You don't need him anymore.
Yeah, so somebody else is
What
going to
are the
benefit
odds
from
of the
that.
Giants blowing people out? I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, there could be a game here or there. That's why I'm saying I'm going 15 to 20% to account for that.
Okay.
Well, the team,
Anyway.
the team that I wanted to bring up, just to give you an idea,
Yes.
is I'm bringing up the Seahawks from last season.
Okay.
Because once again, they play
They
three tight
usually
ends.
try to do that.
Okay, so
Yes,
we
they
would
do.
agree with that. Okay, so here's the snap counts for the three Seahawks tight ends who are also, by the way, still on the roster. I'm focusing on, by the way, Noah Fant,
Yeah.
Will Dissly,
Yeah.
and Colby Parkinson.
Okay,
Those are the
that's
three.
fair.
Okay, now maybe this is not a good example since they all play much higher than we anticipated. Fant, we say, is the number one guy, right? Okay, he played 60% of the snaps.
Right.
Then Dissly, 52% of the snaps.
Okay.
Colby
They do a lot
Parkinson,
of double tight
That's
end.
why. So
a lot
maybe
of double tight end plays.
I mean, but once again, is that the team you're looking for, or do you want a team that doesn't play a lot of double
I
tight
think the
ends?
Giants will mix some of that in. I'd like to probably see more than they will use. I don't think they're going to use a lot, but I think they'll use some.
Well, just to give you an idea, Parkinson played 41% of the snaps.
Did he
And
really?
He was the third tight end. Okay.
Wow.
So let me bring up.
That's a lot.
You want to look at the Niners? You think the Niners would be a good example? But Kittle got banged up, so that may not be the best example. But because San Francisco is another team that plays.
Why don't you look at Buffalo
The Bills you want to look at?
and
Fine, I'll bring up
Kansas
the
City
Bills.
and see those two teams because of
Okay.
the offensive schemes
That's fair.
that these coaches have come from. See what they did with their third tight end.
Well, because the Chiefs have Noah Gray as
Yeah.
their second guy. I mean, Kelsey we know
right.
plays.
Well, you
okay.
know, right. He's
Well-
the monster.
No, Kansas City, this is a good example. I like this based on the numbers. Kelsey, 80%
Yeah.
of the snaps. Noah Gray, who I mentioned, 52%. Then the third tight end, you could go one or two ways. They had Blake Bell and Jody Fortson. Fortson played more. He played 16% of the
Yeah,
snaps.
and that's the guy I,
think that's
would
a good
think.
number.
Now,
Okay?
of course, remember the Chiefs also got involved in some blowouts, and that helped that situation probably a little bit too.
Sure. But it gives you an idea
yeah.
of the third guy in
Yeah.
the pecking order.
And how about the Bills?
I'm going to bring up the Bills now, too, as a fair comparison.
I mean, again, for the amount of snaps that the third string tight end plays, are you better off going with the blocker or better off going with the more versatile athletic guy? It's a really hard decision.
I would lean towards the blocker right now, before we even see anything at training camp. That would be the guy I'd lean
The
towards.
previous years, Paul Dottino would have said that hands down. Right now, given this team, this system, these coaches, I think I might go the other way. Only because I think that's what they might do. If I had the decision, you know me, I'm going to lean towards power football every time.
Dawson Knox played 76% of the snaps. Quinton Morris played 26%. Tommy Sweeney was at 6%.
And Tommy Sweeney is now here.
Correct. Tommy Sweeney's now here. Yeah. Who
I'll-
could be the third tight end.
If he is the third tight end, whether or not he believes he's going to get more than 6%, I have no idea. But he's here because of the Buffalo connection. I'm sure that it was Shane and Dable that gave him that first phone call and said, "Are you interested?"
Sure. And that's what I'm also taking into consideration when I'm looking at the chances of making the roster, the connection to Buffalo. But I don't think the Giants are going to have this type of a breakdown because Bellinger is going to get more than 26%
Yes, he
of
will.
the snaps.
There's no doubt
so
about
it's
that.
not going to be identical, but Buffalo was at least a good litmus test just to look at under the circumstances. Here's another thing to take into consideration before we wrap up here. When you assess who you keep, how many tight ends, do you say to yourself, keeping Cager on the 53-man roster, we ensure he'll stay, as opposed to Sweeney, there's a better chance he hangs out on the practice squad? Do you look at it from that standpoint? Because my point is, if you keep three on the active roster, I would still make a case to keep the fourth tight end
Without a
on
doubt.
the practice squad.
Without a doubt.
But you could argue, and a lot of this may have to do with what we see in the preseason.
Because then Myrick comes into play too.
Myrick's another one.
Because I think you can get him through.
Okay, but Cager versus Sweeney is the bigger question mark. Who do you feel better about?
All you need is one team
That's
out
right.
there
Yeah.
that desperately needs a tight end, and do they need a blocker,
Or a
or do they
receiver,
need an
yeah.
athletic guy?
Could go
And if
either
that
way.
one team needs one, and the rest of the street free agent tight ends don't fit their needs, they're going to grab your guy.
100%. Yeah.
You just don't know.
I mean, right now it's hard to answer that because I think you can easily make a case either way,
Sure.
depending on how injuries play out over the course of the preseason. Something to think about. Indeed, that will wrap up Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. We'll be back up and running again on Monday. We're going to start our opponent previews as we go through each and every team that the Giants will play in the 2023 campaign. And today's episode, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and on Giants.com/podcasts. For Paul Dottino, I'm Lance Medow. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll speak to you on Monday right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Have a good one.